She exposed the prison's darkest secret, and the government tried to erase her. But what happened next shocked the entire nation. She was one of New York's toughest and most fearless investigators, smart, unshakable, and obsessed with justice. But when Detective Rebecca Cole went undercover inside a women's prison, she uncovered a nightmare the world was never meant to see. They burned her house, erased her identity, and even declared her dead. But they made one fatal mistake. You can't kill the truth. What followed was a war, one woman against an entire system of corruption, lies, and power. And when the truth finally came out, it changed America forever. Before we begin, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe to the channel, because the last twist in this story will leave you absolutely speechless. Now, let's begin. In New York City, the air always carried a low hum, trains clattering on elevated tracks, taxi horns stitching the avenues together, neon signs blinking like false promises. The Bronx Correctional Facility for Women sat like a hulking, indifferent monolith between a laundromat and a shuttered deli. From the outside, it had the official trimmings of a secure institution. High fences topped with coils of razor wire, floodlights that washed the yard in clinical glare, and granite-faced buildings that kept secrets in their joints. On paper, inspectors praised its procedures. In practice, corridors of concrete and iron hid a different rhythm, one measured in whispers, the shuffle of bare feet and the small, stifled sounds that never reached the street. Rebecca Cole had not intended to become anyone's myth. She had been born in a placid Ohio town where the river froze in winter and kids learned how to build kites out of old grocery bags. Her mother had worked double shifts at the hospital and taught Rebecca that the world owed no favors, only consequences for the choices you refused to make. Rebecca took scholarships, juggled night classes and patrol beats, and learned how to read people the way some read maps. She wore competence like armor. At 32, she had earned her stripes in the Department of Internal Affairs through attention to detail, stubbornness, and an impatience for excuses. People called her Iron Rebecca, not because she was cold, but because she refused to bend to the convenience of silence. On a rain-streaked Tuesday morning, she sat behind her desk in Manhattan, the city gray outside her window. Her coffee had gone lukewarm, a half-eaten scone on a paper plate. She should have been sifting through a case file on embezzlement, routine paperwork for a woman who believed paperwork could be a kind of justice. But the knock at the door shifted priorities. Deputy Mark Ruiz, the man who delivered the prison's lunches and sometimes stayed after hours to clean the break room, stood in the doorway like a man carrying a fistful of questions he couldn't straighten out. He was younger than she had pictured, kind-eyed and thin from working long shifts. He had the look of someone who had seen too much and had kept it because the alternative, yelling in a hallway full of boots and badges, felt like risking everything. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something about the Bronx facility." Rebecca listened. She had learned to let a man unfold until he could no longer stall. Mark's words came in small bursts, like someone breathing through a straw. "At night," he said, "it's not staff. It's they take the women. Wardens circle a few officers. They threaten them. They keep them quiet with fear. There's nowhere to go. Cameras don't cover certain blocks. The night shift has routines, shifts that aren't on any schedule. The women disappear into rough rooms. They come back broken. If anyone speaks, they get punished." Rebecca's hand tightened around the paper cup. The phrase "broken" felt like a report card, precise and brutal. She felt a familiar fever rise in the sternum, that old chemical called responsibility. "Why tell me?" she asked. "Because I don't want to be part of it," Mark said. "I load the vans. I serve the food. I saw things once, twice. I left the kitchen and I saw a group disappear with a woman. They laughed. Nobody reports it. I'm scared. You have power. You can do something. Power, a difficult word. Rebecca had spent years convincing herself that power without proof was nothing more than a loud accusation that could end careers and lives. She had seen colleagues ruined by falsehoods and watched the department retreat from scandal like a tide. Ask properly, she thought, and the tide might come back. Do you have evidence? She asked. Mark shook his head. No, but there's a way to get it. They only do it at night, in a wing that's supposed to be locked for disciplinary segregation. No family visits, no lawyers. If someone could be there, not as an inspector, not as an officer, they'll be treated like the rest. Swallowed up. If you go as an inmate, maybe you can hear them. Maybe you could get a look. The thought was a blade that cut both ways. If Rebecca entered the Bronx facility as an inmate, she'd be without protection, without the badge that deflected 1,000 micro-violences. She could be exposed in minutes. She could be humiliated, hurt, or worse. She had to think of the women who had no choice but to remain. She spent 2 days planning. She spoke to one trusted colleague, Detective Carla Jensen, who had the quiet ferocity of a woman who never let the rest of the world define the contours of her rage. Carla's eyes were the kind that measured risks into specific terms: loss of badge, potential career fallout, personal danger. Rebecca asked for no cleansing assurances. She only asked for honesty. You're going undercover, Carla said. Alone? Alone, Rebecca said. If I bring a detail, it changes everything. They get cautious. I'd be a target the moment I step in. I need to be someone they can break, at least outwardly. We get them when we have proof, Carla's jaw set. I'll arrange the paperwork. A plausible arrest, a charge we can trace back to your alias. You carry a tiny camera in your collar. Microphone, too. If anything goes south, I'll move. But you can't act like yourself. You cannot let them see Iron Rebecca. Rebecca nodded. She practiced a different posture. Softer, guarded, eyes slightly downcast. She learned to walk like a person who had given up and had little left to lose. Her alias would be Rachel Moore, 28, a mid-level accountant accused of siphoning funds from a non-profit. It was believable, had the right combination of small-time desperation and bureaucratic error that would land someone in a detention intake. Rachel would be unremarkable, forgettable. She would be careful to let the world underestimate her. The intake at the Bronx facility was clinical, a performance of procedure. They booked her into a holding cell, where the hum of fluorescent lights made everything feel exposed. She felt the weight of the orange jumpsuit around her just once, like a costume settling on a body not used to its shape. She kept the camera buttoned neatly into her collar and tested the microphone in a sentence under her breath. Night came like a velvet curtain. The building's other rhythms took over, the distant clank of metal, a radiator's slow huff. The yard emptied. The guards on duty started routine patrols, and the kind of small banter that keeps people human in institutional silence. Rebecca let the hours pass. She watched faces. Some women were closed like books with the edges burnt. Others tried to share stories in tidy fragments. An inmate named Gloria, a broad-shouldered woman with soft eyes, took a shine to Rachel for reasons Rebecca could not yet sort. Gloria offered a cigarette she didn't have. Rebecca declined. She wanted nothing to complicate. The evidence she would have to gather, what stunned her more than the obvious cruelty, and there was cruelty in the way a guard would shout at a woman for folding the blanket incorrectly, was the economy of fear that ran like a ledger through every corner. The women had a code. Keep your head down, sleep when you can, keep your mouth full of other things instead of questions. Rebecca had thought she knew what fear looked like. Here it looked like the habitual lowering of eyes, the quick flinch when a footfall came too close, the way a woman paled when a certain name was mentioned. At 2 a.m, events escalated. A group of officers came in, not the amiable official kind, but men who moved with a private confidence, the kind that comes from unaccountable power. They hovered by the segregation wing like predators on a path. Rebecca's stomach tightened. She remembered Mark's description, the night circle, the way they took turns, the way they used threats to bend voices. One of the officers, tall with a permanent bruise-colored scowl, carried himself like he owned the night. He barked orders. The others followed with that easy cruelty of a crew that had been rewarded for silence. Listening through walls, Rebecca heard muffled commands and a woman crying, stifled. Her heart pitched into a ferocious rhythm. Part of her wanted to burst in, badge raised, lights flaring. But the plan required restraint. This was the hour when the story would reveal itself. If the devices recorded, if the women kept enough courage to whisper the names later. She learned, in those hours, the small arithmetic of survival. How prisoners barter for favor. How an extra cigarette or a kind word can become a currency. How alliances among inmates can create fragile refuges. Gloria confided in Rachel with a whisper that felt like trust. They take the ones without visitors. They know who won't be asked about. They use promises. They threaten placement. They tell us if we talk, we'll vanish in the other block. We don't have the phone numbers that matter. We have nothing. Rebecca catalogued everything. She let the camera take the beats of the night. Doors opening too quickly, the dragged boot notes of conversations, the soft, almost invisible collapse of dignity. She recorded a confession when an officer, mixing arrogance with boredom, boasted to a colleague about how a warden's favorite arrangement made the nights easier to endure. The officer's name, Thomas Raines, warden. The voice was recorded, thick with the comfortable violence of someone who never expected consequences. By dawn, Rebecca had more than whispers. She had names, a pattern of schedule rotations, a handful of testimonies she had pried loose by listening long enough and answering in the right tone. She had also learned a new, starker thing, how thin the line was between exposure and death in a place that believed itself above public scrutiny. When she finally slipped out of the facility in the muffled light of early morning, escorted, but with the badge still tucked away, she felt the city differently. The air tasted like a promise that had been broken and then remade. She handed Carla the files and the tiny, vibrating drive that contained the night's recordings. "You could never have made it through if you'd tried to do it alone," Carla said. Though her voice trembled with a mixture of anger and relief, Rebecca didn't answer with bravado. She felt the enormity of the work ahead, the legal labyrinth, the officers who would try to bury the tape, the warden's allies at the municipal level. She knew, too, that she had traded one kind of isolation for another. Once the investigation opened, the department's politics would begin to grind, and every decision would be scrutinized for motive and flaw. There was a twist. Then not everyone who seemed to be a villain was wholly irredeemable, and not everyone who seemed like an ally could be trusted. Mark's courage had been genuine, but it had come at the cost of placing himself within reach of retaliation. Gloria's willingness to speak had been born out of a calculus of survival, and also a stubborn hope that someone from the outside might care. When Rebecca left the building that morning, she did not yet know the name of the woman whose silent face would haunt her after the headlines cleared. She thought instead of small things, the way a cigarette's ember glowed in the dark, the smell of disinfectant that never quite removed the memory of the body, the way fear etches itself into the muscles so that even after release it can stay like an ache. She also thought of the sound of the recorded voice that matched one name to many actions, the proof that could unravel a culture built on unchallenged power. She returned to the office with a burden heavy as iron. The city outside had gone about its business, children waiting for buses, a man with a violin case hustling through the drizzle, and everything seemed stranger for the knowledge that within institutional walls men could arrange nights of predation and call it tradition. Rebecca had entered the Bronx facility as Rachel Moore. She walked out as Rebecca Cole with the weight of more than a badge. She carried an obligation that would not let her sleep until the ledger balanced and the women behind those walls could be safer. Not because the papers said so, but because someone had finally chosen to refuse the long, comfortable. The morning Rebecca delivered the recordings to the headquarters, the city was silvered with rain. Water streamed down the courthouse steps like veins of mercury, and the pavement glistened under the wailing sirens. Inside the Internal Affairs Division, her arrival stirred a quiet ripple. People who had once whispered about Iron Rebecca now looked at her with something between awe and concern. Chief David Morrison, a man with a stomach hardened by bureaucracy and 25 years of survival in politics, called her into his glass-walled office. His tie was immaculate, his tone surgical. "Rebecca," he began, "do you have any idea what kind of hornet's nest you just walked into?" Rebecca placed the small encrypted drive on his desk. "It's not a nest, sir. It's a landfill, and it's been festering for years." The chief leaned back, sighing. "We've heard rumors, complaints from inmates, but nothing substantial. You think this footage changes that?" "I don't think," she replied. "I know." She explained everything: the infiltration, the alias, the recordings of the warden and his men, the women's testimonies, the system of fear. Morrison listened in silence, his hands folded like a prayer he didn't believe in. When she finished, he stood and looked out the window. "Do you realize," he said quietly, "that if this goes public, it'll shake the entire department? The mayor, the commissioner, the board of corrections, they'll all come down on you." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "Then let them. Someone has to pay the price before more women do." He didn't respond immediately. The only sound was the rain tapping against the glass. Then he said, "I'll authorize a covert inquiry. You'll remain the lead investigator. But Rebecca, watch your back. People protect their monsters when those monsters wear uniforms." That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of those women, the hollow look in Gloria's eyes, the trembling of the younger inmates who had forgotten how to hope. And beneath it all, she felt the burning presence of the warden, Thomas Raines, a man who smiled as he destroyed others. She replayed the audio over and over. His voice filled her apartment. "They don't talk. Fear's the best guard you'll ever hire." The arrogance in his tone made her blood boil. The following week, the investigation deepened. Carla handled data analysis, cross-referencing staff schedules and night logs. Rebecca visited the victims one by one, but convincing them to speak openly was a war of its own. In the visitation room, she sat across from Gloria. The woman's wrists were thin, her knuckles scarred. "You got out," Gloria said quietly. "That means you're either crazy or braver than the rest of us. I need your help," Rebecca said. "Your testimony can change everything." Gloria gave a bitter laugh. "Change? Lady, this place eats truth for breakfast. You go to war with wolves, you better not smell like mercy." Rebecca leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to be a hero. I'm asking you to survive out loud." For a long moment, Gloria stared at her. Then she nodded slowly. "If I go down, I'm taking them with me." Word of the secret probe began to leak through the facility like smoke. Guards became cautious. The night routines changed. Warden Raines grew restless. Rumors swirled that someone had betrayed him. One evening, Rebecca received a strange call. A male voice, distorted and low, whispered, "You think you're saving them? You're next." The line went dead before she could trace it. 2 days later, Mark Ruiz, the cook who had started it all, disappeared. He never showed up for duty. His apartment was found unlocked, his phone smashed in the sink, and the hallway CCTV conveniently malfunctioned. Rebecca's world tightened like a noose. She drove to the Bronx at midnight, rain slicing through her headlights, fury cutting through her exhaustion. She stood in front of the prison gates, heart hammering, watching the towers glow like eyes in the dark. Inside those walls, the truth was rotting, but now the rot had started to spread outside. The next morning, she met with Chief Morrison again. "Mark Ruiz is gone," she said. "Dead." "Not yet confirmed." "But someone wanted him silent," Morrison rubbed his temples. "Jesus Christ, Rebecca. This is spiraling out of control." "No," she said coldly. "It's finally starting to make sense." She slammed a folder on his desk, a new report she had pieced together overnight. "You see these transfers?" she said, pointing at the pages. 6 guards moved here from Rikers last year. The same 6 connected to misconduct allegations that were conveniently buried. Guess who signed the transfer papers? Raines. He brought his predators with him. Morrison looked at her grim and weary. "You're saying this is organized?" "I'm saying this is a system," she replied. "And it's been protected from the top. Carla entered the office just then, her face pale. "Rebecca, you need to see this." She held out a tablet. It was security footage from 2 nights ago, the prison cafeteria. On screen, Mark Ruiz was serving food. Then 2 men approached him. The video cut abruptly, replaced by static. The timestamp ended at 11:42 p.m. "He's gone, Rebecca," Carla whispered. They erased him. Rebecca felt her chest constrict. For the first time in years, she felt fear not for herself, but for the thin, breakable chain of truth she'd been pulling from the dark. That evening, a new plan began to take form in her mind. Dangerous, reckless, but necessary. If she couldn't bring the system down from inside, she would set it on fire from the outside. She opened her laptop, wrote a series of encrypted messages, and sent copies of the footage to 3 independent journalists, people she trusted more than her own department. Then she stared out the window, the city skyline shimmering with deceit and rain, and whispered, "You wanted silence, Rains. Let's see how loud the truth can get." But she didn't know yet that someone was already watching her from the street below. A dark sedan idling in the rain, its headlights off, a figure smoking silently inside. And that figure had orders that would turn Rebecca Cole's crusade for justice into a race for her own survival. The night the truth began to hunt her back, New York was drenched in thunder. Rebecca's apartment on the Lower East Side stood like a lone island amid a sea of rain. Inside, her living room was dim except for the glow of her laptop screen, where a half-finished report blinked at her, a document that could dismantle an empire or bury her beneath it. She sat still, her coffee gone cold again, her mind replaying every frame of the footage, the smirk on Warden Raines's face, the way he whispered to the guards like a king among thieves. Each image burned into her brain like acid etching on glass. A faint sound broke the silence, a car door closing downstairs. She frowned. The street was quiet at this hour, only the hum of neon signs and the occasional rumble of the subway below. She moved to the window, pushed the curtain aside. There it was again, a dark sedan, engine idling, headlights off, parked across the street. She'd noticed that same car twice before this week. Rebecca's instincts, honed over years of chasing corruption, kicked in. She turned off the lights, leaving only the computer glow. She reached for her gun from the drawer, cold, familiar steel, and held it steady as she listened. Rain drummed harder against the glass. Then 3 soft knocks on the door. Her heart skipped. "Who is it?" A pause, then a low, rough voice. "Detective Carla Jensen." "Open up, Becky, it's me." Rebecca hesitated only a second before unlocking the chain. Carla slipped inside, drenched, her blonde hair plastered to her cheeks. Her face looked pale, the kind of pale that came from fear, not cold. "You shouldn't be here," Rebecca said. "You were being followed." "I know," Carla whispered, glancing toward the window. "They're watching both of us now." "I think Morrison's office has been compromised." Rebecca's stomach tightened. "You're saying—" "I'm saying someone inside Internal Affairs is feeding information to Raines." The words landed like a slap. Rebecca paced, jaw tight. "That explains why Mark disappeared, why they knew exactly when I was inside the facility." Carla nodded, pulling a folded note from her pocket. It was soaked and smudged, but one word was clear. "Run!" Rebecca stared at it. "Where did you get this?" "It was shoved under my door this morning," Carla said. "No signature. But I think it was from one of the guards who turned. Maybe one of the 2 rookies you scared straight." Rebecca's mind spun. Gunal and Abhishek, the young guards who had once trembled before her undercover identity. She had promised them protection. Maybe one of them had tried to warn her. Outside, thunder cracked so loud the window trembled. The city's lights flickered. "Becky," Carla said quietly, "I think they're going to come after you next." Rebecca smiled, but it wasn't amusement. It was exhaustion shaped into defiance. Then let them. But deep down, she knew this was no longer an investigation. It was a war. The next morning, Rebecca drove straight to headquarters. The security guards at the front desk gave her odd looks, respectful but wary. The air in the building felt wrong, too still. When she reached Morrison's office, the blinds were drawn. He was on the phone, his voice hushed, his face grey. "Sir," she began, "we need to move on this now. I've sent copies of the evidence to 3 journalists. If anything happens to me or Carla, it all goes public." He looked up sharply. "You what?" "I'm not risking another cover-up." Morrison rubbed his temples. "You've gone too far, Rebecca. You think those reporters will protect you? You've painted a target on your back and on mine." Rebecca didn't blink. "Then you should have worn a vest when you joined the department." Before he could respond, his intercom buzzed. "Sir, there's someone here to see Detective Cole," said the secretary's voice. "He says it's urgent." "Send him in," Morrison said. The door opened and 2 men in dark suits entered. "Federal agents. Or at least that's what their badges claimed. Detective Cole," the taller one said. "We need you to come with us. There's been a breach in your case files." Rebecca's gut told her this wasn't protocol. "Which division are you from?" she asked. The agent smiled faintly. "The one that doesn't exist, that was enough." Before anyone could react, Rebecca flipped the table lamp toward them, its light bursting in their eyes. She lunged for the hallway, Morrison shouting her name behind her. The agents followed, boots thundering on the linoleum. Rebecca sprinted down the corridor, heart pounding, mind racing. She reached the fire escape, slammed open the door, and vanished into the rain. She didn't stop running until she reached her car 3 blocks away. Her phone buzzed, Carla's name flashing. "Rebecca! Are you safe?" "Not for long," she panted. "They're on to us. Get out of your apartment. Don't trust anyone, not even—" The line went dead. By nightfall, the story broke. A major news outlet released the first fragment of the recordings, Raines's voice, unmistakable, dripping with arrogance. "They're animals. You control them with fear, not law." Within hours, social media exploded. Protests erupted outside the Bronx facility. Women's rights groups demanded resignations. The mayor's office scrambled to contain the firestorm. But the victory was short-lived. At midnight, the same footage mysteriously vanished from the network's website. The article disappeared. The journalist who had received the files, a man named Victor Lane, was found unconscious in his office. His hard drive missing. Rebecca sat in her car outside the channel headquarters, watching the chaos unfold through the windshield. She clenched the steering wheel, fury and helplessness colliding. Someone powerful was cleaning up the mess, faster than she could expose it. Her phone vibrated again. A text, unknown number. "You can't win this alone. Meet me at Pier 19, midnight tomorrow. Come alone." She stared at the message. The number was untraceable. It could be a trap. It could be salvation. She typed back one word. "Who?" The reply came instantly. "The one who knows what happened to Ruiz." Her pulse quickened. If Mark was alive, if he had escaped, he might have the key to everything. But Rebecca also knew one thing. Anyone who tried to bring light into darkness in this city always paid a price. And the next night, when she walked through the fog at Pier 19, rain falling like whispered secrets over the Hudson, she had no idea that the truth waiting for her there would shatter every line. She thought separated justice from vengeance. The Hudson River was a sheet of black glass that night, only broken by ripples from the drizzle and the faint reflections of distant skyscraper lights. The docks at Pier 19 had been closed for months. Old warehouses, rusted cranes, forgotten containers, and silence thick enough to swallow footsteps. The city beyond hummed with life, but here it felt like the edge of the world. Rebecca parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, her hood drawn low. Every instinct screamed trap, but curiosity and duty had fused inside her into something stronger than fear. She carried a tiny recorder pinned beneath her jacket and her gun holstered inside the waistband of her jeans. The smell of wet salt and iron filled the air. Somewhere a ship's horn moaned. At first, she thought she was alone. But then, between the shadows of stacked containers, a man stepped forward, thin, drenched, clutching a satchel. His face caught a shard of light. "Mark," she whispered. He looked older than he had days ago, his beard unkempt, eyes bloodshot, clothes torn like he'd been running for his life. "Rebecca," he said in a voice that trembled. "They tried to kill me." She moved closer, scanning the docks. "Where have you been?" "They found out I talked. 2 officers took me from my apartment. I escaped when the van stopped at a toll booth. I've been hiding since then." "Do they know you're alive?" "Not yet. But they will," Rebecca exhaled. "Why did you call me here, Mark?" "You could have gone to the press." He shook his head violently. "No, you don't understand. The press can't stop this. It's bigger than Rains. Much bigger." Rebecca frowned. "What are you saying?" Mark hesitated, then opened the satchel. Inside were several folders, all marked with official seals: Department of Corrections, Finance Division, Procurement Unit. "These are payrolls and visitor logs," he said. "But look here. The same signatures appear on the accounts for 3 private prisons across the state. Guess who approved their funding?" Rebecca's eyes widened as she read the name stamped across the documents. Deputy Commissioner Harold Weston. Her voice turned cold. "Weston? He's above Morrison. He oversees the entire correctional network," Mark nodded. "Exactly. Weston protected Rains. The exploitation at Bronx wasn't random, it was systematic. They were selling inmate labor and other things. The women weren't just abused. Some were traded, Rebecca, moved between facilities, disappeared on paper as transfers." Rebecca's stomach knotted. "Jesus Christ. They silenced complaints, bribed inspectors, even paid off journalists. Rains was only the handler. Weston is the architect." A wave of nausea hit her as the wind howled through the metal beams overhead. "Do you have proof?" Mark reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive. "Everything. Emails, wire transfers, hidden memos. I copied it all, but they're tracking me. I can't hold it anymore. You need to take it." He extended the drive toward her, hand shaking. Just as Rebecca reached for it, a spotlight exploded over the dock, blinding white slicing through the rain. "Police! Don't move!" A voice roared through a megaphone. Rebecca froze. Dozens of red and blue flashes flooded the pier. Officers in tactical gear surrounded them, rifles drawn. Mark dropped the drive into her hand. "Go!" he yelled. "Rebecca Cole!" shouted one of the officers. "You're under arrest for espionage and obstruction of justice." Rebecca's heart pounded. She looked toward the voice, and there, stepping from the lead vehicle in a black raincoat, was Deputy Commissioner Harold Weston himself. His expression was calm, almost bored, as if he were signing another memo. "Detective Cole," Weston said evenly, "you've caused quite a storm. Hand over the evidence, and this can still end quietly." Rebecca took one step backward. "You framed me," Weston smiled. "No, Detective. You framed yourself by thinking the truth mattered more than the chain of command." Mark shouted, "Don't trust him." But the words were drowned out by gunfire. Rebecca hit the ground, rolling behind a container. Bullets sparked off metal. She looked back. Mark lay sprawled, a dark stain spreading across his chest. "Mark!" she screamed. He coughed, blood bubbling on his lips. "Run! Don't let it die with me." The USB drive gleamed faintly in Rebecca's hand. She pressed it to her chest, breath ragged, and crawled toward the rear exit of the dock. 2 officers flanked left. She took one down with a precise shot, then dove into the water as the rest fired blindly. The icy shock tore her lungs open, but she kept swimming beneath the dock until the sirens faded. When she finally emerged downstream, shivering and gasping, the drive was still clenched in her palm. By dawn, the news had already been rewritten. Every major channel carried the same headline: Detective Rebecca Cole under investigation for leaking classified material. The story painted her as a rogue officer who had fabricated corruption claims to divert attention from her own misconduct. Photos of her car, her apartment, her past cases all flashed across the screen. The public turned overnight. The hero had become a fugitive. Rebecca watched from a safe house in Queens, hair still damp, dressed in borrowed clothes. Carla was with her, pacing. "They've blacklisted your badge," Carla said. "They've frozen your accounts, revoked your access to the department network. They've made you an enemy of the state." Rebecca's voice was calm, but her eyes burned. "Then I'll be their nightmare." Carla stopped. "What are you planning?" Rebecca held up the drive. This contains proof of Weston's network, not just in New York, but across 6 states. Contracts, payouts, names of judges and lawyers who covered for them. If we release this the right way, they can't bury it again. Carla frowned. The press is compromised. Even Victor's paper got shut down. Then we don't go to the press, Rebecca said. We go to the people. She connected the drive to an old laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. Carla watched as encrypted folders opened. Spreadsheets, scanned documents, recorded calls. Rebecca began uploading them to a secure Whistleblower site, scattering files across multiple servers. But then the laptop screen flickered. Unauthorized access detected, flashed a warning. They're tracing us, Carla said. Rebecca yanked the cable out, heart racing. They're faster than I thought. Within minutes, the hum of engines filled the street outside. They found us, Carla whispered. Rebecca peeked through the blinds. 2 black SUVs had stopped across the block, men stepping out in raincoats. She turned to Carla. Back door, now! They ran through the narrow alley, water splashing underfoot. Behind them, boots thundered, voices shouted. Rebecca's lungs burned, but adrenaline carried her forward. They ducked into a construction site, weaving between steel beams and hanging tarps. When they finally paused, both women were breathless. Carla looked at her. They won't stop, you know. You're threatening an entire industry that runs on corruption and silence. Rebecca wiped the rain from her face. Then we burn it all down. That night, the city saw something it hadn't seen in decades. Thousands of anonymous leaks flooded the web. Financial documents, inmate transfer records, internal memos, all linked to Weston's name. Hashtags spread like wildfire. Rust justice for the silenced. At first, officials called it fake. But then more evidence appeared. Photographs, voice memos, testimonies from women who had vanished years earlier, now resurfacing in shelters and safe houses. The dominoes began to fall. Within 48 hours, the Department of Corrections was in crisis. Weston's mansion was raided. Warden Raines tried to flee the state but was intercepted at LaGuardia. Carla's voice trembled when she read the news aloud. They got him, Becky. They actually got him. Rebecca sat by the window exhausted, eyes hollow from days without sleep. She didn't smile. Then it's not over, she murmured. Because for every Raines or Weston we catch, there's another one watching, waiting, learning how to hide better. Carla nodded softly. Then what do we do? Rebecca looked out at the skyline, the endless towers glowing through the rain. We keep the light on. And as dawn broke over Manhattan, she finally allowed herself a deep breath, not of victory, but of survival. Because justice, she had learned, wasn't a final act. It was a war fought every single day, in dark alleys, in courtrooms, and inside the conscience of those who refused to look away. What she didn't know was that somewhere, miles away, in a quiet federal archive, a sealed file now carried her name. Subject, Rebecca Cole, classified threat level, internal dissident. The war wasn't over. It had just changed shape. 2 weeks passed, and in those 14 days, the entire city of New York seemed to breathe in rhythm with a rumor. The story of a fallen officer, a whistleblower, a traitor, a savior. No one could agree on which version of Rebecca Cole was true. The tabloids painted her as an outlaw, disgraced detective behind data leaks still at large. The underground blogs called her something else entirely, the ghost of justice. But Rebecca didn't care anymore. She wasn't hiding from the law. She was hiding from a system that had turned law into camouflage. She had changed her appearance, shorter black hair, glasses, a faint scar painted on her cheek. Every night she shifted safe houses, staying one step ahead of whoever was still tracking her. Carla stayed in touch through coded messages sent through encrypted forums. Together they had become ghosts within the very network they once served. But ghosting could only last so long. One night, Rebecca found herself in an abandoned subway tunnel under Brooklyn, a forgotten stretch used by the homeless and the hopeless. There, she met a contact from an independent digital collective called The Mirror. They were hackers, whistleblowers, journalists, people who had no official faces but infinite courage. The man she met called himself Shadow. His face was hidden behind a hood and a cheap LED mask that shimmered with static patterns. "You've made a lot of noise, detective," he said, his voice distorted by a modulator. "Half of the city wants you dead. The other half wants to follow you." "I didn't come for applause," Rebecca replied. "I came to finish this." Shadow tilted his head. "You already finished it. Weston's empire is gone. He's in custody. Rains is behind bars. What more do you want?" Rebecca's eyes hardened. "The truth doesn't end with arrests. It ends when the system that let it happen collapses. Weston wasn't the top. He was just the door." Shadow crossed his arms. "You're suggesting someone higher?" Rebecca pulled a folder from her jacket, soaked, wrinkled, but intact. "The drive Mark gave me had encrypted data I couldn't open before. Now I can. There are coded payments from a shell corporation called Aegis Holdings. And guess who signed the authorization forms?" Shadow leaned closer. "Who?" Rebecca said the name slowly, each syllable slicing through the damp air. Harold Weston reported to the Deputy Secretary of Justice, William Harper. Shadow froze. "You mean the federal department? The man who oversees the prison contracts nationwide?" Rebecca nodded. "The same. He's the spider sitting in the middle of this web." Shadow exhaled sharply. "You're playing with fire, detective. This isn't just state corruption. This is federal. If you go after Harper, you'll vanish before you hit send." Rebecca's voice was calm. "Then make sure someone else sends it." The next few days turned into a fever of planning. The Mirror began collecting evidence, cross-verifying contracts, tracing offshore accounts, and finding patterns Rebecca could only have imagined before. They uncovered an ugly truth. Aegis Holdings wasn't just a company. It was an entire privatized prison network, outsourcing human beings as commodities. For years, Harper had funneled state budgets into fake programs, rehabilitation centers that didn't exist, job training facilities that never opened. The women who disappeared from Bronx Correctional weren't missing. They had been relocated into private facilities owned by Harper's partners, where there were no records, no oversight, and no hope. It wasn't just sexual abuse anymore. It was human trafficking wrapped in the paperwork of justice. Rebecca felt sick. She stared at the documents, her throat tightening. Every victim's name was a number now, every scar a signature of greed. "This is why Weston was protected," she muttered. "He wasn't working for himself. He was protecting an entire economy of suffering." Shadow's mask flickered. "And now you're going to expose the economy." Rebecca looked at him. "No, I'm going to collapse it." On the 12th night after her meeting with the Mirror, Rebecca and Carla reunited in person for the first time since the ambush at Pier 19. They met inside an old church in Harlem. Its pews cracked, its stained glass covered in dust, but its silence sacred. Carla looked thinner, exhausted but alive. "I heard Weston made a deal," she said. "He's offering names for a lighter sentence." Rebecca nodded slowly. "That means Harper's getting nervous. You sure you still want to go after him? He has senators, judges, the FBI, all in his pocket." Rebecca smiled faintly. "Then we'll pull his pocket inside out," Carla sighed. "You know, sometimes I forget you're human." Rebecca chuckled softly. "Sometimes I do too." They worked through the night, connecting every shred of data they had, merging Mark's files with the Mirror's archives. By dawn, they had built a complete map of corruption stretching across 7 states. At the center was Harper's signature, repeated hundreds of times. "This is enough to sink him," Carla whispered. Rebecca didn't answer. She stared at the last photo on the file, a security still of Harper shaking hands with the governor, smiling. His eyes were small, cold and proud. She said quietly, "Men like him don't drown easily. You have to hold their heads under water." 2 days later, the world stopped again. At exactly 10:23 a.m., a massive leak hit the internet. Harper Files, the Empire of Silence. Over 10,000 pages of classified documents, contracts, and testimonies appeared simultaneously. On hundreds of platforms, the reaction was instant. News. Anchors stammered through breaking updates. Protesters filled the streets. In front of the Department of Justice, the president himself called for an emergency review, and Rebecca, Cole's name, once cursed, now became a symbol again, this time not of betrayal, but of reckoning. But power doesn't die quietly. That same night, as Rebecca and Carla hid in a safe house near Albany, the walls shook from a blast that turned the entire building into an inferno. The fire department later called it a gas leak, but Rebecca knew better. She and Carla had escaped moments earlier through the back alley, coughing, bruised, but alive. Carla's arm was burned, Rebecca's shoulder dislocated, yet both of them kept running until they reached the woods. When they finally stopped, Rebecca collapsed onto the ground, gasping. The forest was quiet, except for the crackling of distant flames and the whisper of rain beginning to fall again. Carla pressed her hand to Rebecca's wound. "Becky, we can't keep doing this. You've already done enough." Rebecca's face was pale, streaked with blood and ash. But her eyes, those grey, unflinching eyes, still burned. "No, Carla. Until the system is rebuilt, none of it's enough." Carla looked at her and whispered, "Then what are you going to do?" Rebecca slowly sat up, staring into the dark horizon. "They tried to erase me from their records, so I'll become something they can't erase." Weeks later, as federal investigations tore through the government, Harper resigned for health reasons. Weston's testimony went public. Dozens of high-ranking officials were suspended, but Rebecca Cole, officially, was never found. Her name was whispered in activist circles, printed on protest signs, etched into murals across subway tunnels, a ghost that never stopped haunting the institutions that birthed her. And sometimes, in the stillness of dawn, a new leak would appear online, fresh documents, more names, more evidence, all signed with a single phrase at the bottom, "For the forgotten." No one knew where they came from, but Carla did, and every time she read those words, she smiled through tears, because somewhere out there, maybe across the ocean, maybe under a new name, Rebecca Cole was still fighting, not for revenge, but for every voice that had once been silenced behind concrete walls and iron bars. The world had tried to bury her. It didn't realize she had become the storm. A quiet rebirth 3 days after the explosion. Emergency crews found 2 unidentifiable bodies among the rubble. Dental records, they said, matched Rebecca Cole and Detective Carla Jensen. Their names were carved into the next morning's headlines. "Whistleblowers die in accidental gas explosion." The investigation closed within 48 hours. The nation moved on. But in a fishing town 200 miles north, where the river met the ocean in grey fog, a woman limped into a dockside clinic under another name, Rachel Moore. Her shoulder was bound with a crude bandage. Her eyes, once steel grey, were hidden behind tinted glasses, and though her voice trembled when she spoke to the nurse, the rhythm of her heartbeat was calm, steady, alive. Rebecca Cole had learned the first law of survival. If the world insists on writing your obituary, let it, then walk past your own grave. The exile, for months she drifted along the New England coast. She worked in a boatyard, sanding old hulls and patching the ribs of forgotten vessels. No one asked about her past. She paid in cash and kept to herself. At night, she lived in a small cabin facing the harbor, where the wind rattled the windows and the gulls screamed like broken alarms. Sometimes, when she couldn't sleep, she opened her battered laptop, the same one she had rescued from the ruins. It contained nothing but fragments, partial files, encrypted names, corrupted videos, but among them were threads she hadn't followed before, small anomalies buried inside Harper's digital empire, coded transactions that didn't stop even after his arrest. Somebody else was still running the machine. Harper might have fallen, but the system had grown new limbs. Rebecca sat staring at the data, the glow of the screen reflected in her tired eyes. A single line of code blinked in front of her. Transfer node 47, Eastern District Facility H. She whispered to herself, Facility H. What are you? The next day she disappeared again, leaving only a note pinned to the dock's bulletin board. Gone south to find better seas. The awakening of the Mirror Carla Jensen, contrary to every official record, had survived too. She had been thrown clear of the explosion into a drainage canal, burned and half-conscious, but alive. For weeks she hid in a monastery hospital in Vermont, healing under a false name. When she recovered, she re-established contact with the Mirror, the anonymous collective that had once sheltered Rebecca. They had scattered after the leaks, hunted, blacklisted, erased from the digital world. But Carla pulled them back, one signal at a time, and when she finally found a secure line, a familiar encrypted message appeared on her screen, from RC, still breathing. Following trail. Facility H. Carla stared at the screen until tears blurred her vision. Then she typed back, "You're not alone." Facility H was not marked on any map. Officially, it was a temporary immigration processing center located in a decommissioned naval base along the Virginia coast. In reality, it was a ghost prison, privately funded, no public records, no visitors. Rebecca reached it by night, disguised as a contractor in a delivery van loaded with maintenance tools. The air smelled of salt and diesel. Guards smoked by the gate, half asleep. She had spent weeks preparing, memorizing blueprints, forging IDs, sewing another micro-camera into the lining of her vest. She moved like she had during her first infiltration years ago. The same deliberate calm, the same silence pressed into her bones. Inside, she found what she feared, rows of narrow cells, all women, most undocumented, none registered in any federal database. Some were too weak to stand. Some stared blankly at the fluorescent light. A guard mocked one woman in Spanish. Another filmed her with a phone. Rebecca's stomach twisted. That night, she broke into the administrator's office and plugged her drive into the computer. The files confirmed everything. Contracts with shell companies, transport logs, signatures that led straight to a new name, Senator Victor Landon, the same man now leading the Anti-Corruption Committee, investigating Harper's crimes. Harper had been a pawn. Landon was the architect behind him, the one who had turned the exposure into a political performance. Rising higher while pretending to clean the rot, Rebecca copied everything. Then she sent a single encrypted message to Carla. Got the heart of it. Time to cut it out. The return of the ghost the following week. Washington awoke to chaos again. A new drop hit the networks at dawn. The Landon papers, video evidence, financial ledgers, and a 7-minute clip recorded inside Facility H showing conditions so brutal that even seasoned journalists wept on air. The source of the leak was unknown, but its digital signature bore the same tag as before. For the forgotten, the Senate hearings exploded into scandal. Protests surrounded Capitol Hill. International observers demanded inquiries. Landon vanished the same day. Rumors said he fled to Europe. Others claimed he never left the country. A body found weeks later in a burned-out SUV by the Chesapeake Bay was identified as his, though no one ever proved it. Epilogue. The woman who became the Stormer year passed. The world changed in small but real ways. New oversight committees formed. Whistleblower laws were strengthened. The Bronx Correctional Facility was shut down permanently, its walls demolished to make way for a memorial garden. At its gate, a stone plaque read, "In memory of those whose voices were taken. May no wall ever silence truth again." Carla Jensen stood there on a grey morning, laying a single white lily against the plaque. She looked older, scar running across her hand, the only souvenir of the fire. Behind her, a group of young journalists took notes, recording the story of the two women who had shaken a nation. One of them asked softly, "Do you really believe she's dead?" Carla smiled faintly. "Dead people don't send me emails at 3 a.m. The reporter blinked. "You mean she's But Carla was already walking away, her coat fluttering in the wind. Far away, somewhere along the Atlantic coast, a small sailboat moved against the horizon. Its name, painted in faded blue letters, read Liberty's Echo. At the helm stood a woman with short, dark hair, a faint scar near her shoulder, and eyes the color of storm clouds. She adjusted the sails, the wind filling them like lungs, and looked back toward the coastline one last time. The radio on the deck crackled. A familiar voice, distorted but warm. "Rebecca, it's done." They finally passed the bill. Rebecca closed her eyes and smiled. Her voice, when she answered, was steady, calm, the voice of someone who had outlived every lie. "Then maybe now," she said, "we can start building something worth protecting." The boat turned toward the open sea. Rain began to fall again, soft, rhythmic, endless. Each drop merged with the waves until sky and water became one, and in that horizon of grey and silver, the woman who had once been Detective Rebecca Cole disappeared, not in defeat, but in freedom, because justice, she had learned, wasn't a badge or a courtroom or a bullet. It was a tide, and tides never stop coming back.